And joining me now for the Radical podcast with Majid Nawaz is Lois Perry. Lois has been director of campaigning group CAR26, which campaigns against the UK's absurd net zero climate change policies. Lois has also been, for a very temporary period, leader of the UK Independence Party, which we're going to get to as to exactly why Lois, after a very short time indeed, left UKIP, resigned her leadership voluntarily, and then explained a few days later as to why that happened. Lois is now with Reform UK, working with Nigel Farage. We'll get into some of the work Lois does with Reform. And finally, the reason Lois is here is Lois is now also UK director for the Heartland Institute, with a brief to exclusively focus on this net zero issue and raise net zero as the UK's next political dynamite topic, such as Brexit was in days gone by. So Lois Perry, welcome to the Radical Podcast with Majid Nawaz. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Just want to make one very quick point so I don't get told off.
Of course.
Whilst I am a supporter of Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, and we collaborate on various things, he's a big supporter of Heartland USA and Heartland UK and Europe. I have no official capacity with the Reform Party. So we collaborate, we're supportive of each other's work, but there's no official role. So I just want to get that out there straight away.
Understood.
I don't want to get in trouble with the big man.
Of course. Let's start with your role in CAR26, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that was where, at least in my case, you first came on my radar as a campaigner. You've been doing, and I've obviously been following since then. You were on my show on LBC, in fact, in that.
Yeah, you were one of the first people to have me on talking about it. Thank you.
It was an honor. Before they cancelled me, obviously, but I feel like we've been collaborating on these various topics of interest since then. So let's start with CAR26 and your work there. How did you get involved? What was CAR26 about? What was its brief? Do you feel like you achieved it? Let's start with how you got involved.
Well, I mean, I've been doing, I've worked in media for forever. I started working at the Daily Telegraph City office when I was 18 years old.
Oh, wow.
And then I went on to work for Richard Desmond and Stan Meyerson at Northern and Shell Media. They bought the Express Group. They were OK Magazine. They also had some other quite interesting top shelf publications that I had absolutely nothing to do with. But I was involved in
plausible deniability, Lois.
Pardon?
Plausible deniability.
Yeah, especially Asian Babes and some of the other more questionable titles.
Right.
But no, I was involved in advertising sales, and also the last position that I held in the company was I was the advertorial and promotions manager, which meant that I collaborated across the group with editorial and advertisers, and it was absolutely fantastic. I met my ex-husband at work, and we decided to start a public relations company, which was, in its time, phenomenally successful. At one point, we represented all of the dragons from Dragon's Den, and I'm talking about when it was in its heyday.
You're referencing Hillgrove PR, are you?
Yeah, that's right. Hillgrove PR. That's my ex-husband. Yeah. And we worked with everybody. One of our clients at one point was Charles Saatchi. We worked with Little Chef. We got them the Heston Blumenthal documentary on Channel 4. So, it was fantastic. But part of that, what came out of that, is I started being asked to be a regular contributor on BBC Radio 2 on the Jeremy Vine show. And I did that for a long time. They normally had me on arguing with feminists who I felt were just going so extreme with with taking offence to literally everything, that the only losers would be them. And in actual fact, I never predicted that it would be the trans issue that really did over the feminists. But actually, that is what happened. But anyway, so I commented on women's issues, being a mum, media. I'm quite well informed about politics, obviously, and history. So I did that for a long time. And when Jeremy got his show on Channel 5, I went over to that and I became a regular panelist on that as well. And it was that brought me to the attention of a group of Brexit supporting philanthropists, very successful, wealthy guys who felt that net zero was being used as a horse of Troy to bring in extreme control, Marxism, basically, globalism, and much bigger than Brexit, in terms of our personal freedoms and in terms of our lifestyle, and but basically almost taking us back, as my granddad would have said, we're all serfs, Lois, taking us back to the feudal system, where you've got the globalists at the top and everybody else is in their 15-minute city, or better still, in their home, staring at a screen on universal basic income, unable to go out. And if they're a naughty boy or naughty girl on social media, their electricity is cut off or their car doesn't work.
So let's dig into that a bit, because that also connects to the work you're doing at Heartland. And I did say to you, I did say to you earlier, we want to front load some of this, because the first half of this Radical podcast will be available to everybody on our Substack bestseller platform, Radical Media. And then the second half will be for premium subscribers. So let's front load a lot of the net zero stuff, because it does dovetail nicely with your current and up-to-date role as UK director for Heartland as well, because the two overlap what you did at Car 26.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned how net zero will lead to some form of prison planet and 15-minute cities. Can you explain and elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, every single policy that's being brought in the name of net zero does not reduce CO2 emissions. So that makes you think, why are they doing it then? Because if CO2 is the enemy and emissions are the enemy and are causing climate change or global warming or whatever it is they've decided to call it that particular week, what is the real agenda? For example, electric cars. There's more CO2 emissions to make an electric car than there is a normal car. There's more CO2 emissions in terms of creating the electricity using fossil fuels or transporting fossil fuels or pellets from other countries to make the electricity than there would be if we just had a normal supply of gas and petrol. So what's the real agenda?
These facts you're saying are, anyone can go and verify them. That electric cars are less green in how they're made, the process to make them. What about, for example, the batteries? Have you looked into those?
Batteries are unable to be recycled, which mean, and also once the batteries kaput in your car, which can take between 5 to 6 years.
Is it that short a lifespan?
It can be.
Wow.
It can be, and the battery will cost as much as a new car. Virtually. So the resale value.
It's like buying a printer, right? When you have to buy the ink cartridges cost as much as the original printer did.
Absolutely. And, I've said this before, I'll say it again. The electric cars are not to do with being green. They're not to do with saving the planet. They're to do with people not being able to drive, because a huge amount of people, especially working class, middle class people, lower middle class, do not have driveways. They do not have access to off-street parking. So, and they don't have the money for these expensive vehicles in the first place. So this is about getting people out of their cars. And I don't know if you remember, Maggie, but when you came to one of my Car 26 dinners that I did at the Carlton Club, a good friend of ours, philanthropist, Mr. Fox, had printed the white paper that was done in the House of Lords, actually, that was about behavioural changes. And the name of the paper was Learning the Lessons of COVID. And it wasn't learning the lessons of COVID as in how horrific, how we manipulated everyone. Yeah. It was learning the lessons of COVID as in, what a brilliant job, boys. Let's now do it on behavioural change for net zero. And it admitted in the document that things like reducing the speed limit does not reduce emissions or is any safer, 20 miles an hour in non-built up areas. It admitted that the whole electric car.
All of this was in the white paper.
Out of their cars.
All of this was in the white paper.
Yeah, that's right. It was about behavioural change to do with net zero, learning the lessons of COVID. So they admitted, it was admitted that the whole electric car revolution, the whole speed limit things, just various things that were being done to either frustrate people out of their vehicles or to just stop people driving altogether because it was unaffordable. And that included the low traffic neighborhoods, congestion charge, all of those things. It was admitted didn't do anything to save the planet and was about getting people out of their vehicles. So I mean, you know, until people had access to their own vehicles, their own private transport, it's revolutionized working class lives, middle class lives. It's enabled people to start businesses, to be able to not have to live, you know, super close, to be able to. If we take that away from people, we are so controllable. And then we put us in our little flats.
Single mothers, for example.
Single mothers, disabled people, elderly people. It disenfranchises everybody. What about, you know, a young guy who wants to be a white van man? Yeah. You know that electric vans, have got a range so small, it's unbelievable. And if you actually put anything in that van, which of course is the main reason someone would have a van, the range is even smaller. I've spoken to so many small business owners who said there just won't be vans. There won't be people, you know, being able to be a white van man or be a plumber or any of those things. So anyway, so we're all in our pods. We're all on, you know, universal basic income.
This is back to the prison planet scenario.
Yeah, we've got smart meters now.
Explain before you get to smart meters. Explain the universal basic income thing and how that connects to this whole idea of being in a technocracy.
Right. So basically, if you have a situation where people can't be entrepreneurial, they can't have their own businesses, and also most jobs are either being given to people that have been brought in to do jobs that, you know, people don't want to do on very, very low incomes, or jobs that can be done by computers or AI or robots. You know, if you get to a point where either the jobs the menial jobs that are the only jobs that exist are being done by people who are working much below the minimum wage because they've been deliberately and illegally brought in to do that, which I believe is happening. I believe that big corporate companies are complicit in individuals being brought over illegally.
This was the whole H-1B visa debate that we did a radical dispatch on that 2 weeks ago. Everyone.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
It's all detailed in there. The whole thing in the US and it's why Steve Bannon went ballistic at Elon Musk, because Musk, I believe, betrayed MAGA on this H-1B visa issue. Which
I did see something on that. Yeah. That's right.
Look, at the end of the day, legal migration needs to be careful too, because it's undercutting domestic labor. They're doing it on purpose. Corporates are bringing in cheap labor so that they can hire people that have on paper the same qualifications as somebody would domestically, but don't have the domestic costs. Because, for example, if you're here from a community, you've got children here, you've got family here, you've got other responsibilities, so your wage expectations are slightly higher. They're getting in younger mobile people who are maybe, for example, still at the early stages of their career, still desperate. They want to live in a developed country, so they're prepared to take lower pay as a result.
And they're prepared to live in situations that you and I would not be prepared to live in. You know, even to the extent, you know, I've heard stories. A good friend of mine, Andre Walker, has a guest that comes on his show that was one of the main beneficiaries from all the labour that came in when we joined the European Union. And he talked about houses where one person would be sleeping in the bed during the day and another man would be sleeping in the same bed at night. Now, you know, we would not put up with that. So you've got a situation where those jobs are being filled, but I believe, you know, that it's a scandal, really, this situation. And then all the other jobs are being done online, or they say you can work from home. And then, so you're at home, you're either working from home or your job has been, you know, it's now being done by a robot. What are you going to do? The government are going to give you your universal basic income, which they're already trialing in different parts of the country. I believe it's £800 a month or something like that.
And then, of course, if you upset them, they can switch it off.
They can switch it off. And if you've got a smart meter, sorry, just going back into that, and an electric car, they can just switch that off as well. It can be, it's remotely, literally remotely controlled. And if all money, again, we talked about this once before in an interview that we did together. If all money is digital, there's no cash, then you're going to behave yourself, aren't you? If all of the money is coming from the government, and all of this is being done in either the name of net zero or COVID. I mean, the whole getting rid of cash thing was a COVID thing, wasn't it? Because they said there was germs on the notes. And then suddenly people, I know, it's so ludicrous, isn't it? And then suddenly shops think it's okay.
We've been using physical money for the entirety of human evolution. Right?
I know. Yeah.
Suddenly it's going to get us ill,
haven't we?
Suddenly it's going to get us ill, basically.
Absolute nonsense. So everything is about hemming us in, getting us into these pods. Either our job becomes superfluous, or they say you can work from home. And I mean, life will get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Now, where you with Heartland Institute, this is also your brief right now. So, as I said, we're going to dovetail both.
And freedom of speech and libertarianism in general, but they're mainly known for climate realist campaigning, and they've been phenomenally successful in the US.
You've said this will be the next Brexit campaign issue for
Nigel said that at my event, which you very kindly came to. Thank you.
Explain that. Unpack that a bit.
Right.
Why is it going to be the next Brexit? Are we still marching headwards kind of straight towards this, or is our government still trying to force these policies onto us in the name of net zero? And where are we with this debate?
Yeah, I mean, they are. They're still trying to march on. In America, it's fantastic. You've got Donald Trump standing up saying it's a scam. We're going to continue fracking, wind turbines and all of that stuff. That is nonsense and has to be heavily subsidized. He's reversing the whole petrol and diesel bans and not subsidizing electric vehicles. I mean, he's really going for it. America pay 8 times less for their energy than we do, right? 8 times. And that's because they frack, and also because when Donald Trump scraps all this green nonsense, their energy will probably get even cheaper. But unfortunately, we've got Red Ed, who has
Ed Miliband.
Ed Miliband, who is obviously the energy minister. I think it's energy and net zero. So if that isn't a loaded title, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
But they are pressing ahead. They're doing a thing. So Donald Trump last week, I did an opinion piece in the Express about it, talked about the lunacy, the economic suicide of us not just stopping exploration in the North Sea for oil, but for energy, but also, also not what's the word? Decommissioning the wells that we've got already. And then Ed Miliband saying he's committing billions and billions to carbon capture, which is ridiculous. I mean, plant some trees if you believe in all of that kind of stuff. And also heavy subsidies for wind farms and for solar. I mean, we've got a situation at the moment where Keir Starmer has taken away the winter fuel allowance from elderly people, yet he's announced that he's going to be giving grants out for people to put solar panels on their house. I mean, look, people looked out of the window. Solar panels. It's ludicrous.
Yeah, because we don't have much sun here, do we?
No, but all wind at the moment.
True, but so let me understand something. This entire net zero model that the World Economic Forum, the UK government, US under Biden, probably no longer under Trump, but at least under Biden, they were pursuing this.
In Europe, they're going for gold. I was in Strasbourg recently, and it's all about the green
full throttle. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So this entire thing, you're turning this debate upside down and on its head. You're saying it's the exact opposite of the truth, right? So that's why I'm so fascinated with this conversation, and I want to unpick it, because you're saying the whole green electric car business is a scam. It damages the environment more than it doesn't.
Even the tires, even the emissions on the tires, because the vehicles are that much heavier. What comes off the tires is actually very damaging to your health and the environment.
These are the micropollutants that come
That's
off from the eroded leather, rubber on the tires, and that's what causes the problems for people's breathing. But
yes, it does.
You're saying that. So you're saying that the way that electric cars are being sold to us is a scam.
Yeah.
Wind farms are a scam.
Yeah.
Solar panels don't degrade when you bury them, and they have to be renewed.
And they're made in China, and they need 100% gas backup all the time.
Right.
All the time.
Right. So and also the electric that we're using with batteries in the cars, in the everything that we're being asked to switch over to electric, where does that energy come from that charges that electricity in the first place? So all of this you're saying is upside down.
It's not from a wind farm. It really isn't.
Right. And so the one common thing, Lois, they all have in common, this is where I'm trying to get to as to where this push for so-called green, when it's not really green, where this push is coming from. Because and I want to get to your views on CO2 in a second as well, and its impact on the supposed impact on climate change or not. But all of this, the whole shift to net zero, which is electricity, requires chips. And so I want to ask you, these chips at the moment, where are the majority of these chips made, the microchips?
China.
Right. So is there a reason why we're being pushed in this direction?
Well, I believe that the globalists have made a decision to carve up the world. They don't see nation states. So if you're looking at the whole world and you're deciding which part of the world is going to have the contract for certain things, China's obviously been given the industry for all of the countries, because all of our steel, everything that you can imagine that we used to produce, whether it's, has gone over to China. So a decision has been made at a global level that certain countries will have certain contracts or deals. China is building, I think it's 60 or 70 coal-fired power stations every year. Yeah. CO2, if you believe that it creates global warming or climate change, doesn't respect borders. Yeah. So if you've got a situation where every single ounce of CO2 that we're not producing in this country is just being produced somewhere else.
Yes. And then they say China has the right to do that because they're developing and they need to be given a chance to pollute. Are they giving permits, or because we're not allowed to pollute in that way, but China is?
They've just taken everything that we used to produce, everything that we used to do, they're doing, and they're doing it for lots of countries all over the world. So it's not about having a right to do it. It's just that it has our dependence on oil and gas is the same as it's always been, and it's going to increase and increase and increase and increase. It's not real that we will not need it. So therefore, it's just been shifted. Nigel Farage has talked about this at length. It's just been shifted over to somewhere else.
But what I mean is that China doesn't have any net zero targets.
No.
But so we're expected not to emit any CO2. We're expected to shut down our coal mines, build wind farms, build solar energy. And meanwhile, China can basically burn as much coal as it likes.
Absolutely. But I believe, and I've said this at length, and I said the first interview I did on GB News with Nigel Farage about this, I had to convince him, because he said, well, if it's not about saving the planet, what is it about? And, I had to he gave me a bit of a rough time, actually. And I do tease him about this sometimes now, and I said, it's the deliberate deindustrialization of the West. And to deindustrialize and to get people to go along with it, there has to be a boogeyman. So it either has to be a war or an ongoing war on climate change, an open-ended thing. I mean, obviously, you've read 1984. The whole premise, the whole way that they get the characters in the book to behave themselves is that there's a permanent crisis, permanent war going on. So the war is climate change, allegedly. So it means, we better shut down all our industry. We better not drive. We better not have any autonomy. We better, if you deliberately make energy 8 times more expensive than it needs to be, then you are deliberately forcing people into peasantry. You are deliberately lowering their living standards. It's on purpose. You're stifling entrepreneurialism. It's on purpose. It's an anti-capitalist agenda, net zero. It's
right. And this is back to when you said at the beginning, this is a Marxist agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. It is.
On this climate change topic, if that's the permanent sort of boogeyman that we've got to be scared of, obviously in other parts of the world, there's also war added on top of it. But
absolutely. It's no different to Gaia worship. And for young people, especially who've had faith taken off them.
Yeah.
They've got a way of, showing they're a good person.
Yeah. So this climate change stuff, then those young people you mentioned, because they're going to look around, they're going to say, look, we are polluting the planet. We are, for example, the oceans are full of litter. But let me at this stage, just to make it very clear for people.
Isn't it?
Exactly. You're not talking about environmentalism. Let me make that. Yeah. You're talking about this idea that somehow when we emit CO2 in the atmosphere, that somehow we're affecting the temperature. So let me drill down on that. What is the impact of the release of CO2 onto, because you did this work as Car 26, I imagine you keep doing it as Heartland Institute as well. What is the impact of CO2 on the climate?
It's negligible. And it's not just me saying that. It's Nobel Prize winning scientists, it's physicists, it's the founder of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore. It is negligible. And also, I mean, we're coming out of an ice age at the moment. The famous hockey stick graph, which shows that around the time of the Industrial Revolution, we got hotter, is because it was the coldest it had been for like thousands of years at that point. I mean, so therefore the temperature would be naturally increasing at that point. I've said this quite a few times, but I'll say it again for your viewers and listeners. They were growing grapes in Manchester in the Roman period to make wine. That's how warm it was. We had and then we also had the medieval warming.
Was that English wine any good, Lois?
I don't know. But that's how warm.
Doesn't have a reputation as a winemaking country these days.
No, not really. We had the medieval warming period, and actually, when there is warmth in a country, or in the United Kingdom specifically, with this example, there's great prosperity, because being cold is much more damaging and it creates much more hardship than being warm does. There was hippopotami swimming in the Thames.
That's just, is that a matter of fact? Is it?
That's a matter of fact. They found skeletons and remains of hippopotami.
So they started measuring the temperatures from the coldest period.
Coldest it had been for forever, basically. Where coming out of an ice age.
And so obviously the temperature would be rising, and you're arguing that is a correlation, but CO2 is definitely not causing it.
If there is any impact of CO2, it's negligible. And also, that if you talk to any physicist or scientist that hasn't been cancelled, or more likely the ones that have retired so that they can speak freely, they'll say we need as much CO2 as possible. And actually, if CO2 levels get below a certain point, the planet starts dying. That CO2 is essential for...
well, what do plants and trees breathe?
Pardon?
Plants and trees, they breathe in CO2 and emit oxygen.
That's right. We all learned about that in science in school, didn't we? You did the little drawing with
so surely a green planet means that CO2 is a necessity.
Absolutely. A lot of scientists believe that it's dangerously low at the moment, CO2. There's also no correlation between CO2 and warmth of the planet. You can have high levels of CO2 historically, and it's been very cold, and vice versa. And also, it's been proved, there's a huge amount of scientific papers that show that CO2 follows temperature. So, for example, it won't be that there's a CO2 rise, then it gets warmer. It will be the other way around. It's a big scam.
This whole thing, the way you're presenting it, and we've spoken before, and I'm obviously of this view, but that means the whole thing is being manipulated. The data is being maliciously manipulated for the purposes of selling us a policy, because a global decision has been made that these microchips will be made in China, and they will cede control to China in regards to all of this electric energy policy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I was on GB News once with Boris Johnson's dad, Stanley Johnson, and he refuses to come on television with me now. And actually, he jumps when he sees me, which bearing in mind some of the things that I've heard allegedly about his past with females, I'm quite proud of that. I make him jump. But anyway, I'm a pussycat. Yeah. But I got him to admit, and it got hundreds of thousands of views. I think you quote tweeted it for me, Majid, as well. I got him to admit that the world, as far as he was concerned, or his understanding, had been broken up into sectors, and that some people would be able to fly in terms of going on holidays and things like that, or business trips, and some people wouldn't. And he obviously didn't mean to say that, and the clip went absolutely everywhere. I mean, we know for a fact, and he's never disputed or denied it, that he is in the pay of the Chinese Communist Party, and and he regularly goes over there. So there's stuff afoot, Majid. There's lots going on here.
Now, as director of Heartland, it looks to me like whatever was the Car 26 brief on net zero, you're incorporating that and other issues like free speech you mentioned into your role as director of Heartland. Speak to me a bit about Heartland, because as I said, we're going to front load this and then get to your political views in a second. But speak to me a bit about Heartland, what they did in the US, their reputation there, why they're coming over to Europe and the UK, how you ended up in this role, and what your brief is going to be as director of Heartland Institute UK.
Yeah, well, thank you. So basically, I got in touch with the Heartland when I was doing Car 26. So that was a couple of years ago. And I was just, because they were doing what we were doing, but phenomenally successfully in the US, whereas Car 26 was the first proper climate realism group we'd ever had in the UK. At that point. There was the GWPF, the Global Warming Policy Foundation, and they were brilliant, but they focused predominantly on slowing down the implementation of net zero policies for economic reasons rather than questioning the science. So it was a slightly different thing. So I developed my relationship with the Heartland. They hosted me in Washington, DC, where I went to Capitol Hill, and I
remember that trip because
it was fantastic, and I met loads of very interesting people on our side of the argument, and I met with politicians, senators. It was an extraordinary trip, actually, and very, very helpful. And they came over to one of my dinners too, as I said, and we just worked very closely together. Then with Car 26, it came to a point where it wasn't job done, but we had changed the narrative. When we started Car 26, I was called a denier. You couldn't question the science. No one was ever allowed on television who had a different view.
There was that BBC policy, right? It's
official BBC policy, but I mean, it was.
Explain that. What is the policy?
The policy is, so for example, normal journalistic integrity rules, guidelines, Ofcom, is that if you have someone on talking about a particular issue, you have to have somebody else on that doesn't agree, the balance element. But what happened was Tony Blair removed that necessity for anything to do with net zero. So they could just say CO2 causes climate change, and it didn't have to be contested. They could say whatever they wanted to do with climate change and net zero policy, and it was the science is settled.
So like with COVID, it was you can't debate this. These are just we are the science, basically.
We are the science, yeah. So that's the BBC policy. But even Talk TV and GB News at the time weren't talking about anything to do with there was, whatever people might believe or not believe, there was no debate was allowed, none. And I'm very proud of the fact that myself, working very tightly with the group of Brexit, supporting millionaires who backed Car 26, and thousands of ordinary members of the public that made small donations, and with your support as well, media-wise, I'm very proud that we opened the debate up It's now possible to say you don't agree with it or to question the science. It's now possible to talk about it. And indeed, people do talk about it now. They didn't before. So with CAR26, I felt that, and so did the main backer, that it had come, that it was time for something new. It was time for something fresh, that we'd done what we set out to do to a certain extent. And in terms of changing the narrative. So then I was offered the opportunity to stand to run UKIP, which I ignored absolutely everybody's advice and did. And
I'll get to UKIP in a second, but I just want to catch the Heartland stuff before we go.
Right. Sorry, I lost my thread.
So that your Heartland,
That's right.
So your role as director and what you're there as Heartland UK.
Yeah.
What is it you want to do on net zero? What is it you want to do on free speech? And the other thing you mentioned, what is your brief and what do you hope to achieve?
Right.
And then we're going to come. I'm very interested in UKIP. We're going to come to
So we made massive impact, but and we were, we got the Conservative Party questioning net zero and everything. And then obviously, most recently, the Labour Party won. So it's not job done. They've ramped up the whole net zero agenda, stifling free speech. So being involved, being the UK and Europe director of the Heartland now, when they've achieved so much in the USA, they've been going for 40 years. They're affiliated with Trump. Bringing what they've done in the US to the UK and Europe at this time, where the Labour Party are doubling down on their net zero madness. They're doubling down on increasing energy costs for people and taking away people's freedom with this sort of communist agenda. So my role as Heartland will be to do what they've done in the US, to keep questioning net zero policies, to highlight what it actually means and what I believe and what the Heartland believes is the real agenda here. So just to give you a bit of background, I was invited to their event in Chicago, their 40th anniversary, about 3 or 4 months ago. And that's when the idea was floated about starting Heartland UK EU. In actual fact, Nigel Farage suggested it in his speech that he did for them.
Right.
So, and you know what it's like, things take a while to work out and everything, but then the support was extraordinary and incredible. I'm very grateful to Nigel personally. I'm very grateful to a lot of fantastic people who've backed the idea, including Richard Smith, who owns Tufton Street, and some other very significant individuals.
And in addition to net zero, what's the brief you're going to be focusing on, and what work will you be doing?